some of the other stories we're following this morning. Over to Japan, the yen has dipped deeper into an intervention risk zone after the Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's reported plan for a snap election. The Kyodo News reports that Takaichi plans to announce a dissolution of the lower house at the next parliamentary session in a bid to prop up the yen. Former Bank of Japan board member Makoto Sakurai says that the bank may raise its benchmark rate as early as April. President Donald Trump says he is imposing a 25% tariff on goods from countries doing business with Iran. The move ratchets up pressure on the government in Tehran that has been rocked by widespread protests. The announcement also risks derailing the US administration's one-year trade truce with China, which is the world's top buyer of Iranian oil. And the Trump administration's actions against the Fed chair Jerome Powell have triggered a backlash that could derail the White House's plans to tighten control over the central bank. Fed officials and US senators from both parties have pushed back on the investigation and reiterated the importance of an independent central bank. Senate Majority Leader John Thune said that the threat of a legal battle with the Fed could make confirming Fed nominees, quote, challenging. Something we touched on a little yesterday, Tom, but lives on as a market narrative.
Well, let's get another view on that story and bring in Michael Zizas, Deputy Head of Global Research at Morgan Stanley, joining us around the desk this morning. Fantastic to have you on set with us, Michael. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for
Let's start with, there's a lot we can talk to you about, and so we're really looking forward to this conversation. Let's start with the Fed. How damaging is this for the Central Bank of the United States?
Well, I think we have to see what the end game is first, right? So obviously it's quite damaging if we were to not have an independent Fed. If we ended up in a situation where the president could effectively choose who the Fed chair is and who is on the board and effectively therefore set monetary policy. We're certainly not there yet. And so right now, monetary policy for us is still very much governed by the traditional aspect of how the FOMC is making its decisions, which we think really has kind of shifted, in particular after last week's non-farm payroll report, from being very labor market focused to very inflation focused. And so we still think you're going to have two cuts at the end of this year, or towards the end of this year, really more contingent on inflation starting to come down and that being proof of concept. If the president, however, sort of gets his style of monetary policy more in vogue, with his Fed chair, or getting the right Fed chair on board, maybe you're going to have more of a permissive attitude around the idea that inflation will come down further. There's a productivity story, and so maybe there's more cuts on top of that. But that's where we think really the debate is right now, the sort of the legality of whether or not the president can actually put the right people on the board.
Yeah.
That's still TBD. The Supreme Court, the Lisa Cook case, I think that's really the touch point we have to look at.
I mean, to your point, there's a number of different scenarios that could come through on the back of this, but these are extraordinary times.
Sure.
And if we do get the scenario where President Trump is able to reshape this institution in his image, as he's done with other parts of the government, what does that do in terms of your views about the debt and the deficit of the United States? And yields at the long end. I mean, when do we get to a crunch point on that?
Well, and so I would distinguish between reshaping the institution in his image via traditional channels, i.e. getting his appointee as chair, and sort of as more appointees become available, getting people more like-minded with their economic view, which would be a little more, hey, we could be dovish because we expect productivity to pick up. That's more sort of traditional channel and it potentially preserves the independence of the Fed. If you're talking about a situation where the Supreme Court says that the firing of Lisa Cook was justified, and therefore you end up in a sort of close to de facto situation where the president can do what he wants with the Fed, then yes, I think the markets you point to are exactly the shock absorbers you look at. You look at a substantial steepening on the long end of the curve, 30-year selling off, the term premium being higher, and the dollar being considerably weaker. You saw some of those trades go in last year in anticipation of this being a somewhat higher probability, but there would certainly be more room to run there.
Dollar keep weakening from here?
So again, I'd say
what is the higher probability? Is the higher probability?
The higher probability is that we've got some weakening to go on the dollar,
but not much.
But not much. I mean, we were close to 10% down on the dollar last year. We think we have a little more to go, but you're mostly going to stabilize for the rest of the year.
Okay. Can I put the Fed story into what I'm increasingly calling the affordability bucket?
Yeah.
I.e., Trump wants to get everything, the cost of everything
Sure.
down.
Yeah.
Credit cards, groceries, whatever it is, he wants the price down so he can win a midterm election.
Yeah.
How do I try? What does that basket look like to you? And is that a trade that I could put on, should put on, in and around that policy package into November?
I don't think that there's potentially a trade there because a lot of these efforts, they're sort of questionable in terms of what the actual fundamental impact is going to be, right? So take, for example, what they're trying to do with bond buying of mortgage bonds, right?
Interest bonds, yeah.
Right. So we're potentially getting mortgage rates down, 30 basis points or so.
Yep.
What our team would say about home price affordability is it's really only going to impact that marginally. So it's not necessarily going to impact that story all that much. To the extent there's a through line from policy to markets, we don't really think it's about affordability. We really think it's about the corporate capital expenditure story and AI in particular.
So not selling banks, buying staples. There isn't that kind of a trade that goes on into the midterm.
I don't think so. However, I think where we'd be wrong is we should pay really close attention to the Supreme Court decision that potentially is going to be delivered tomorrow on the tariffs themselves, right? So if the Supreme Court does strike down the use of these IEEPA tariffs, and the administration were to choose not to reconstitute those tariffs through other legal means, we think they would. But let's say they didn't.
And through the affordability lens, they might not.
Right, exactly. That's a possibility I think we at least have to entertain.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, then you certainly do have all types of consumer goods that all of a sudden the cost of importing those goods comes down and there should be some give back on inflation there.
Good morning to you, Michael.
Right.
So we are focused on affordability, but it doesn't necessarily deliver by your analysis, certainly on the mortgage bonds.
Right.
We can look at other examples of that. Are you concerned about possible overheating in the US economy? We just had a conversation in the last part of the program with another guest from Deutsche Bank who was saying that that's actually very much on the radar. So despite the conversation about whether we get rate cuts at the Fed, actually what he's worried about is whether we see overheating in the US.
Right. We are concerned about that. We think it's probably just too early for that story. So take the AI theme, for example. If we think the U.S. is going to spend something in the neighborhood of $3 trillion in AI capex over the next few years, $1.5 trillion of that should be debt funded. That's a lot of debt in the private sector. However, we're starting from a place where corporate balance sheets are quite healthy, debt to EBITDA levels are pretty reasonable, cash to debt levels are quite low. So there's a lot of room to sort of absorb that debt issuance behavior. So we'll have to track that over the course of the year. We think that's going to be potentially the red flag that tells us there's some overheating risk, but we think we're pretty far from that. There's plenty of capacity to make the attempt to spend a lot on capex in the AI race and in the reindustrialization theme.
And what's the unexplored opportunity then in that AI capex build out? Because we've talked about it for a long time. We know the names of the companies that are doing a lot of it and raising that debt and spending their money on it. But where does it go next? What's the next part of that build out for you?
Yeah, there's lots of ways to answer this question. I think a really interesting way, though, is about how the adopters might be experiencing their own productivity increases. And so our equity strategy team and Mike Wilson's pointed out that if you look down to mid-cap, U.S. mid-cap and U.S. small-cap stocks, you're starting to see earnings growth you haven't seen in the past. Now,
and Russell's had a really good start to the year, hasn't it? Versus
right. So you've had about 8% earnings growth there. It's a swing from being negative 8% a year ago. Now, is this necessarily AI? I wouldn't necessarily put it on that bucket, but it's almost certainly a productivity story. There's probably some deregulation inside of that story, and so I think there are some downstream effects that you're starting to see thematically in mid-cap and small-cap stocks.
Do we put to bed the Mag 7 outperformance story? Is that done?
No, I don't think so, but I do think that a lot of that will hinge on what your view of the AI story will be going forward. And here I'm not smart enough to tell you, right? So the sort of the frontier model builders, particularly within the Mag 7, if they have substantial success in delivering models that show that there's still exponential increases in intelligence there, then yeah, the sort of the potential ROI on that technology is still massive beyond what's priced in. If it starts to slow, then perhaps the adopters are where more of the juice is going to go.
How are you thinking about Europe versus the US in equities?
We prefer the US, but I think the European story is still quite a good one. There is sort of more of a capex story going on there. There's still more of a defense element going on there. So nothing sort of out of the ordinary, I would say, out of consensus, but we do think that the US is still where more of the capex-driven innovation and capex-driven productivity is going to be, and that's ultimately going to flow through the bottom line.
When you talk to clients here, and they go, "What's the trade? Kind of, what's mispriced? Where am I? What do I need to do here? What looks obviously wrong to you?"
Yeah.
What's the answer to that question?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it depends on the type of investor you're talking about. But if we're just talking about like broad cross-asset purview, one area that we've pointed to as sort of a potential surprise is if you're a credit investor in the U.S., we actually think that high-yield credit is probably going to outperform investment-grade credit this year, which you wouldn't necessarily expect in this environment. But a lot of it is because of the AI theme we were talking about earlier. A lot of the capex that comes
Isn't
along.
that a run at hot economy trade, though? Isn't it? Is that?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. So it's sort of a technical that's reinforcing a fundamental, right?
Yeah.
There's more supply coming into the investment grade market, and then of course because the economy is doing better than we thought, high yield bonds should actually
When do
be
you want to get out of that trade?
not this year.
Okay.
Ask me again next year. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and from your perspective, sitting mostly in the States, Michael, I mean, we talk every day about the latest policy coming out of the White House in whether it's mortgages or the defense sector or all kinds of sectors that fall into the focus of the president. And follow the policy is one of the themes that we've been exploring. I mean, you talked about whether it was the K-shaped economy, not necessarily. You said, I mean, how are you managing to keep a track of that and keep ahead? I mean, you can't be ahead of that kind of thing, can you? Because some of it comes from left field.
Well,
Or did you have to just be
I
responsive?
just you do, and I don't think there's really. So it's interesting. When we first started very intensely covering the interaction between U.S. policy choices and markets, a lot of times traders and our clients would ask us, "Give us calendar events for when President Trump's going to announce X, Y, and Z." You're like, well, there's no calendar events.
No.
It's not. It's
Wake
not
up
like
at 2 o'clock in the morning and you kind of.
well, exactly. It's not like the ECO screen on your Bloomberg terminal, right? So some of this is, if you're an emerging market investor, you sort of always implicitly understood you grew up with the skill set and the knowledge of the intersection between policy choices and markets. I think U.S. investors are starting to, I think developed market investors writ large, starting to embed this as part of their process.
What does it tell us that they have to do that? And then we have former Treasury secretaries and former chairs of the Fed coming out and saying what we saw over the last 24 hours was very much like emerging markets.
Yeah.
I mean, what does it tell us that that's the training that is helpful for covering
Yeah, I mean,
US assets right now?
it tells you that the world is in motion. There's a major secular theme we've been tracking for most of the last 10 years called the shift to a multipolar world, which is not the same as some people say it's like, oh, is the U.S. becoming an emerging market country? That is too reductive a way to think about it. The intersection between policy and markets is just happening more and more and more. And there is a different consensus for policy in the U.S. that it used to be about free trade and government non-intervention. Free trade is now seen, for better or worse, by the American voter as a bug and not a feature. And interventions into the economy are not necessarily dissuaded, right? And that's a view of both the Republican and the Democratic voter. So this is a kind of secular through line that I think investors have become accustomed to, will have to keep becoming accustomed to, even if President Trump's not in office.
But that investing along the lines of a more interventionist US government in the private sector, that is not a short term, that is a longer term thing,
That's right.
I think. Because it seems to me that investors are still kind of waking up to that.
Does it come with a discount? Does that imply a discount to assets? Because that is a key question. Are assets in that kind of world less valuable?
Well, let's say it's still what we're talking about is still quite small compared to other countries that have more interventionist policies, right?
But
So, sure, we're talking about the slippery slope argument. But for example, with the U.S. government taking a stake in a small mining company, to try, to try and get rare earth minerals out of an Alaska mine, it's still ultimately a very small number.
But telling credit card issuers that they can't put rates above 10% feels slightly different to that.
Sure. And now we're obviously testing the limits of executive power. We'll see where this goes. There have been more guardrails in place that I think people appreciated from the legal system and from Congress. Essentially, Congress's inactivity in and of itself. So, I agree that we have to watch the slippery slope carefully, but we shouldn't jump straight to the U.S. as a managed economy.
And it's about passing, as you said earlier, it's about passing the announcement with the real on-the-ground impact as well.
Right.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. Michael
Thank you.
Deputy Head of Global Research at Morgan Stanley. Thank you. Coming up, how many jobs is Citi expected to cut this week as CEO Jane Fraser continues her push to trim costs and improve returns at the Wall Street Bank? The answer when we come back. This is Bloomberg.
When I visited Fernandez at IMAX's headquarters outside Toronto, we went to the facility where IMAX designs and maintains its cameras. The latest next-gen equipment was out with directors on filmed for IMAX sets, but there was still plenty of cool gear on view.
As the head of the finance department, do you look at all the things in this room and think, this costs that amount of money, this costs that amount of money?
Thankfully, no. I don't. When I think about cameras in general and what we, when we first, I'll give you a really prime example, the film cameras. When you thought about it, okay, are we building 2? Are we building 4? Are you building 8? Right? And that's where I start to think about, well, what makes the most sense from a return perspective? Because yes, Nolan wants the cameras, but how many other filmmakers out there use the film cameras? The lens that I look at it through is essentially, how many do we build and in what way? Because the one thing is we are going to invest to build it right and to build it for longevity. But do you need 10 of them? No. Building 4, that was the right number. And do we potentially want to build a couple more? Maybe a couple more, but I don't think we need 10 because they won't always be in use all the time.
I imagine that at different points you need to tell people no. What's that process like for you?
Oh yeah, it's a key role in the CFO position. It is a word that most people are used to, and yet they still think you're not going to say it.
At a time when policy in Washington is driving Wall Street, we draw a distinction between the rhetoric and the action, bringing you market-moving guests and original reporting. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Bringing you the world's business and financial news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Michael McKee at Mount Everest. And this is Bloomberg.
Welcome back. Now, before the break, we asked how many jobs is Citi expected to cut this week. No pleasure taken in announcing this, but it is a fact, so we're going to highlight it for you. The answer is about 1,000 jobs. Bloomberg has learned that the company, of course, which had 227,000 employees at the end of September, is culling its ranks as part of a plan announced 2 years ago to eliminate 20,000 jobs by the end of this year. Streamlining the bank and cutting waste has been a key goal, of course, for the CEO, Jane Fraser. Citi's performance has long been a laggard compared to other major US lenders. Anna.
Well, the banking sector will be firmly in focus, won't it, today? That'll be one of the things on our agenda. We'll get bank earnings coming up later. We'll also, though, have US CPI data to deal with. We'll have earnings from other parts of the US economy and some Fed speakers to listen to as well. Barkin and Muslim will be speaking, and President Trump will be getting a briefing on Iran, Guy, which, of course, is going to be something that we will be watching. But before that, we get the bank earnings story in focus.
We're going to watch that very, very carefully. I'm looking forward to hearing what Jamie Dimon and others have to say on what is happening with the credit card business. Wall Street, biggest banks kicking off earnings season. Expectations of near record profits are certainly being buffeted by what is happening around the layoff story, which kind of normally comes around this time of the year, and potential policy changes out of Washington. How do we fold it all together? Well, the way we fold it all together is we're going to talk to Charlie Wells. He's here with the latest.
Guy, that's exactly right. I mean, we are hearing a lot of turbulence in the banking sector this week, a lot of short-term turbulence, I would say, thinking about some of these policy ideas coming from Washington, not sure how those will factor out. But when you zoom out from this week, when you look at that past year, you see the strength of that KWI index, those major lenders outperforming the broader market, a lot of optimism in the market about these banks and strong fundamentals. And one of the most fundamental themes that we are going to hear about, no doubt, as these banks start to report is deal flow. We have seen in 2025 the best year for deals since 2021, that record-setting year from 2021, really manifesting these green shoots that investment bankers have been talking about for years since that time, finally coming to fruition in 2025. What happens when you get that deal flow? You get investment banking fees clipped from there. You can see that to the tune of almost $10 billion that some of these major banks, we're really seeing JP Morgan a leader here, Goldman Sachs. So this is a theme that despite some of this short-term turbulence that we've been hearing is really going to come out loud and clear today.
Okay, the art of all those deals and fee generation then in focus, and certainly those will be in focus then when we hear from the first US bank to report this week, which is JP Morgan, Charlie. That report dropping on the Bloomberg terminal later today. So how are analysts expecting America's largest lender to perform?
Look, so there's one number that's really jumping out from Fortress Diamond this morning to me, and it is this growth in equities trading. We're seeing growth of over 31% in the quarter. That is, of course, because there has been a lot of volatility in the market that investors have wanted to reposition, and trading desks have been able to take advantage of that. So you see some of, the investment banking activity boosting these banks. You also see it boosting these trading desks. But of course, there also is this theme of growing loan growth in this environment where we are seeing the potential for lower capital requirements. You are seeing some of these major banks, and JP Morgan really has taken leadership here, growing their loan books. So the fastest growth in loan books since 2010. So we're winding back some 15 years there. But I've got to say, risks remain. And I think getting complacent is the issue that we are seeing that this morning could not be beneficial to investors. And some of the risks here, surprises on expenses. We saw when JP Morgan talked about expenses last month, that really hitting their shares. You could see some commentary, some forward-looking commentary on potential momentum coming out of that AI boom, coming out of this M&A momentum, and also that macro uncertainty that we just see in the market right now.
Charlie, great stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Charlie Wells on the banks, talking of macro uncertainty. Let's talk about what we could get when it comes to the CPI number a little bit later on. Skylar's back to talk us through what the market is looking for on this number out of the United States. Upside risk?
Yeah, I mean, the issue is you have conflicting factors, right? So I think it's very hard for this to be a dovish print because we had strong employment last week. We know the Fed is looking more at the employment mandate than the inflation mandate. And so that tells you that it's a relatively hard bar to be dovish. I think the other thing to consider is when we got the November and December data, November and October data, it was a big surprise to the downside because it was distorted by the shutdown. So if you have a weak print, you just go, oh, well, maybe it's just still distorted. But on the other side of it, you have consensus expectations are for a hotter
So it's
print.
not strong, I can ignore it, basically.
Yeah, I think that's largely the message. And I think the issue is if it is strong, your 10-year yield is at the top of the range. So is that enough to have it break out? Probably not. You probably need a series of hot prints, or more likely, you need to see a re-acceleration growth.
What's more important, is it the inflation data or is it anything else on the Fed? It was interesting to hear from Michael Zizas of Morgan Stanley a few minutes ago, and he said what he would be watching for potentially to be more concerned about the Fed would be a Supreme Court ruling in favour of the Trump administration on Lisa Cook. What would you be watching for on that front?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That is something that I would be very concerned about the Fed from, in terms of that sets the precedent that you can get rid of Fed governors, and that means you could have a broad turnover. Because what's stopping you from having the loss of Fed independence now is the fact that you have many members that vote. There isn't a big turnover this year. Stephen Moran's position is potentially turning over. We don't know whether or not Powell's resigning. So that's a maximum of 2 unless you're able to turn over these other positions. And because of that, you can't skew the vote count to having more cuts priced in, or more cuts than what the market thinks is reasonably priced in. So I think certainly if we had that turnover, it's something to think about. But I think the bar for it is relatively low, which is why the market's not pricing it or looking at it super closely.
Okay.
See, Skylar's maybe not remotely interested in CPI now. So, everything else seemed very fascinating, but you didn't seem too moved by the CPI.
Guy was very happy that Skylar wasn't excited
Can
by
you get out
CPI.
of the 10-year range that it's been in? I think it's,
And if it it's not hot and it doesn't do that, then move on. Move on to more Fed now.
I don't know what's more important. Is it the Guy tin can trade or is it the Takaichi trade over in Japan?
the tin can
trade still has legs.
Yeah,
This is the
the
staple
Wall Street
story.
prepping story, I think, is one to watch for. Although Michael Zizas was completely downplaying that. He's not into tin cans. But Takaichi's going to be interesting. That ripples into other markets. Is that going to be enough to get us out of the 10-year? I don't know. Lots of things to get us out of the 10-year range, maybe.
Lots of questions. In the midst of all of that, what we think about the healthcare sector and what it's doing. We're going to be hearing from the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference later on today. The Novo Nordisk CEO, the Roche CFO, the AstraZeneca CFO, all of those voices speaking to Bloomberg. So lots to come on that sector. That's it for the opening trade. Busy morning. The Pulse is up next. This is Bloomberg.
they're setting themselves up with domestic production. And people, it's like when the hobby that we enjoy is threatened. The wire to the plug. Probably. What you would probably need, I'm going to guess that the plug, the camera is intact, but the wires got ripped out of the plug. What you need to do is identify the type of plug that it is, which sometimes I would have to contact the manufacturer to ask. Like I have had to do that before. I've got a plug, I don't know what kind of plug it is, I broke it, and I literally reach out to the manufacturer and say, what kind of plug is this? Once you know the name of the plug, you can buy a spare and either like probably solder it on. So like, hold on. Okay. Like PH 2.0 connector kit. So like, don't buy this. This is the individual connectors and you have to crimp on the pins. This is a giant pain in the ass and not worth the time, in my humble opinion. Like, again, if you just have a ton of time and you like doing manual labor, go for it. What you want is the pre-crimped connectors sets. So what it'll do is it'll come with a bunch of wires that have the pins crimped on already. And then you just stick them in the plug. And then what you do is you solder them to your existing wires. You splice them and solder them to your existing wires. Now, your camera probably isn't a PH 2.0 connector. You need to find out the exact type of connector that it is. But you can almost certainly buy a pre-crimped connector kit. JSH connector kit. Right? SH 1.0. SH 1.0. Oh, is it not JSH? Is it XSH? I think those are the balance connectors. Yeah, there you go. JST XH, that's it. JST XH. Great. JST XH. There's balance connectors. In a kit, pre-crimped wires, ready to go. Pico blade connector kit. There it is, right? Just make sure you get the pitch correctly. The pitch is the spacing of the pins. You need the name of the connector, like JST Molex Pico blade, and you need the pitch, 1.25 millimeter. Once you have that information, you can probably buy a spare kit and just build a spare connector. If you are a masochist, you buy one of these kits with a crimping tool, and then you crimp the pins onto the wires. Don't do it. It's a giant pain in the ass. It's just not worth the time, in my humble opinion. However, if you did do that, you could reuse your existing wires and just crimp new pins onto your existing wires instead of soldering. But I don't like crimping. I've done it. I don't like it. I don't think it's worth the time. Let's see here. Is it okay to buy BLHeli 32 ESCs if it is on the 32.7, 8, 9, 10 version? I wouldn't. Because you just don't know what you're getting. Like 32.9, I can't remember. Valenti, was 32.9 the one with the bug or 32.8?
I think it's 32.9.
I think it's 32.9 as well. Let's just assume that we're right, since two people in the room agree. So
32.10 is the experimental, and 32.9 is the one that was like the beta release that had that bug in it that did release, right? Something like that.
And the bug, what did the bug do, Blunty? Was it a little innocuous bug that just, sometimes you get a desync?
It was a rearm bug, right?
Oh, you're talking about the bug where when you crash and then disarm, and then it won't spin, you rearm, but it won't spin the motors until you power cycle, so your drone is just like dead. Which was the version of BLHeli that had the bug where like once every 10,000 arms it would just randomly go to full throttle even though you didn't arm it? Like you would just plug in and all of a sudden the motors would just go, "Wah!" And like it almost never happened, but like it happened to 10 or 20 people in the whole world. Which was the version with that bug? I don't remember. Was it 32.8? I know that bug did
I
exist.
think that was 32.10. I think 32.8 is pretty solid. Like if you could find a 32.8, that version, my memory is 32.8 was very solid.
So my point is,
32.9 was definitely had some issues.
yeah, you don't know what you're going to get, is my point. And if you get the wrong version, you cannot flash it to a new version. You cannot. And if you get one of the experimental manufacturer only, there was a version of BLHeli that was used by manufacturers before they release for testing. And you can, not only can you not flash it, but you also can't configure it. And people are now shipping ESCs with that firmware on it because you know they can. So like I think BLHeli is too much of a crapshoot. You just don't know what you're going to get. If you knew for a fact that you were going to get 32.7, okay, that's good. I probably might take that. Like if somebody gave me an ESC with BLHeli on it, I probably wouldn't just throw it in the trash because the ESCs are too valuable these days. But I probably would rather buy something with BLHeli S or AM32. Yeah. Where's that question? That's weird. There's a question that popped. Where's that question? Never use BLHeli32 as the configurator gone too. Why don't I see that in my OBS Ninja, my social stream dashboard? That's weird. Hey, look, it sucks that they made that decision. We don't know what pressure they were under to make that decision. When you own a company and your livelihood is on the line, I mean, if you think about it, they were making good money. They have to have been making good money because they were making money for every BLHeli32 ESC sold. Not very much, but you sell a lot of ESCs. I think they were making good money, and they decided to end it and cut off that revenue stream. Now, we don't know why they did that. We don't exactly know. They said it had something to do with sanctions. So maybe they were concerned that the Norwegian government was going to come after them because their ESCs were being used on the battlefield, and they felt like they were going to get accused of violating European sanctions against, you know, supporting or contributing to the war in Ukraine. We don't know. They said it had something to do with something like that. And if they were like, hey, we're going to lose all, we're all going to get sued or fined by the government or go to prison. We have to shut our company down. We just don't know what pressure they were under. It sucks that they felt like they had to make that decision. I mean, frankly, of all of the companies where they unilaterally made a decision, like at least BLHeli32, it was closed source. They owned the code. The people who made that decision had every right to throw that code in the trash if they wanted to. Unlike a project like Betaflake, which is open source, has had community contribution for years, and if any one person said, I'm shutting the project down, we would all have the right to say, hey, hang on, you don't own that. BLHeli32, they owned it, it was theirs, and they felt like that's what they needed to do. And we don't know why they felt like it, but, you know, I'm never going to question somebody who looks at the potential for the government coming after them, which is my guess. My guess as to why they shut down, this is a pure guess, so take it as that, is either they got wind that they were going to be in trouble because a lot of BLHeli32 ESCs were ending up on the battlefield in Ukraine. And maybe they felt like somebody was going to say, hey, we assume that you could be doing more to prevent this, and you're going to be in trouble if this doesn't stop. And they were like, we have no way of stopping this, we just have to shut down. That's one guess, the pure guess. The other guess is that they had some kind of a crisis of conscience. And they were like, hey, I'm not comfortable with a product that I use being used in this way. And they shut down. I can tell you that the BLHeli32 devs are incredibly principled people in at least one way. Before BLHeli32 was a thing, there was BLHeli S, and then BLHeli before that. And BL Heli and BL Heli S were open source. And the BL Heli devs, when BL Heli S was a thing, got real popular. Manufacturers were using BL Heli S, and the BL Heli devs were doing a ton of support. Manufacturers would release a BL Heli S ESC. The ESC would have some problem, and the BL Heli S devs would do a shitload of work on their firmware to fix the problem with the BL Heli hardware so that you could have an ESC that works. And they didn't go back to the manufacturers and say, F you, fix your ESC. I mean, so I'm sure sometimes they did. But they worked tirelessly. And people, I would see people say, can we donate? And they would say no. They refused to accept donations from the public for the longest time. Because they were like, that's just not how we want to do it. And then when that got to be too much for them, they started BL Heli 32. They made the decision to close this code. And instead of being sleazy bastards and taking the open source project and then just, we rewrote the code. Sure we did. Taking an open source project, closing the source, which would violate the GPL. They completely rewrote the code in a totally different programming language, pure assembly. No one has ever disputed that they respected the GPL license of BL Heli S, that BL Heli 32 was a from-scratch, brand new project, brand new code base, which was closed source, and they licensed it to the manufacturers, and they were like, hey, if you guys are going to make money off our firmware, and we're going to have to work to support your hardware, you're going to pay us money. So there's some of the most scrupulous people I've ever known in FPV. I don't know them personally, but just looking at the decisions they made. They refused money from the public for a long time. They correctly respected the GPL when they started a new project. So if they said, hey, we don't like our, and I'm not saying they did, I'm saying hypothetically, if they said, hey, we don't like our stuff being used to fight wars, I thought all FPV hobbyists hated the idea of drones being used as weapons. I'm generalizing. Right? Don't we all hate that? I thought we all hated that. So then you should be happy that BL Heli 32 shut down. Because potentially one reason they shut down was that they didn't like their ESCs being used to kill people, and they closed the whole company. So if you're like, oh, those guys are pussies, I hope you also support Rotor Riot making weapons, and Red Cat making weapons, right? Be idol. I don't know. Maybe you are. Maybe you do support that. I'm just saying. It's be ideologically consistent, I guess. Anyway, we don't have to like it. We can be annoyed. It's a complicated world, I guess, is what I'm saying. It's a complicated world. It's a complicated world. I think about, I think his name was Charles Winchester, inventor of the Winchester repeating rifle. And I once went to the Winchester House in California, which is his old mansion that his widow used his fortune to continuously remodel for her whole life. And it's this wild, wild mansion. Like, she was afraid of ghosts, and she made all these, like, with these dead-end stairwells and this weird architecture to try to confuse the ghosts. I don't know. It's a retraction. But one of the things they tell you about is that Charles Winchester, like, she thought that she was haunted by the ghosts of all the people killed by Winchester repeating rifles. And it's like, you sit down one day and you're like, hey, rifles are a useful tool. I like rifles. Let's make a better rifle. So you just sit down in your lab and you do some nerd shit, or your shop, and you do some nerd shit and you make a better rifle. And then, like, one day you look up and you go, how am I morally responsible for all the things people have done with this tool? You sit down and you make a drone. You make a flight controller. You make an ESC. And you're not, like, necessarily setting out to do that. But the money's rolling in and you know where it's coming from. You know, how much do you care about that? I don't think there's an easy answer there. Yeah. You may be okay with some of the killing that's done and not others, and you don't really get to make that decision. Anyway. Moving on. Good little. I don't know if it was good. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for $5 from Wilco. Is 6S on a 3.5-inch freestyle? I would say that 3-inch to 3.5-inch is about the point where 6S might start making sense. 3-inch and below, like 3 inches right on the edge. 3 inches probably fine on 4S, but for most people, 3.5-inch, you could argue that 6S is starting to make sense. Part of the problem is that below 3 inches, the size of the cells is so small. Like you will get, the smaller a cell, the less amps it can provide. And at a certain point, the dimensions of the cell itself become restrictive, because ultimately, like, the electrical ions have to move through the cell physically. They have to move through the electrolyte to the terminals. And if the cell is very, very small and very thin, it could just have bad performance. Like, I'm not a battery engineer, but suffice it to say. So once you get below about 3 inches, the cells themselves are so small. And if you go to a 6S, the cells are even smaller, right? 4S and 6S, same weight, same watt hours. The 6S has 2 more cells. It has 50% more cells, so the cells are going to be 1/3 smaller, right? So at a certain, I think one of the reasons 6S is bad on 3-inch and below is that if you had a 6S 500 milliamp hour, a 6S 300 milliamp hour, it's just going to be 6 tiny little whoop cells, and like you're going to have high voltage, but you're just going to have a lot of resistance in the connectors. The cells themselves are going to be terrible, and it would be better to be 4S 700 milliamp hours, because the bigger cells are just going to give you better performance. I think at 3.5 inches, you're at the point where if you felt like going 6S, it might make sense, and certainly by the time you get to 4-inch, 6S makes sense. But 3-inch and below, I'm not sure. It really depends the size of battery. Like 6S 850, sure. 6S 600, I might rather have a 4S 850-ish for the same weight. And Ciati points out 6S is rough on the smaller and lighter ESCs. They're smaller, they're physically smaller, they have smaller FETs, they have lower voltage rating. 6S much more likely to pop the ESCs. Thank you for Shot by Burgos for 10 reais, 10 Brazilian reais. Thank you for $5 from Bean Coro, who asks, I bought a 10-inch Mark IV V2 frame from AliExpress, and I built a dual camera night drone. Caddx Infra V2 at the bottom, Axis Flying 256 thermal on a GoPro mount. Yikes. That's an impressive drone, I'll tell you what. Caddx Infra and thermal? Hell yeah. There you go. For tuning, should I start with Chris Rosser's AOS 7 preset or the UAV Tech 10-inch preset? I'd probably start with the UAV Tech 10-inch preset, since there's a fair difference between 7 and 10 inches. But presets are kind of always a crapshoot. Like, fly it very carefully the first time out, and be very sensitive to the potential for hot motors or flyaway, right? Just do a little hover test. Like, literally just take off, hover for 30 seconds, like maybe do some very small tilts, nothing too abrupt, land, feel the motors. Are they smoking hot? No? Okay. Then take off, maybe do some throttle punches. Whoop, 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 whoop. Come back down. Very nice to be able to do this line of sight if you can fly line of sight. Just some little throttle punches and stuff. And again, if it goes, or if it goes, and tries to fly to the moon, again, then feel the motors. Are they hot? And sort of work your way up to full aggressive flights, just to make sure that that preset isn't going to mess you up. Christex FPV, thank you for €2. That's a BLA 32 question. I think we answered that adequately. Skydar FPV, thank you for $10. I want motor sound back in my earbud. Money no object. What's the best goggles, VTX, and overall setup to make it happen? It's going to be analog because nothing else transmits audio. Analog. Nobody else has a video transmitter that transmits audio. And then best analog goggles today, in my opinion, HD0 V2 goggles. Video transmitter. Should you get the Unify DP, which is, you know, TBS quality? Should you get like a GEP RC 2.5 watts? It's going to need to be something with a microphone connection. Ideally, it's a video transmitter with a built-in microphone. What has a built-in microphone? Rush, Tank, Solo. Does it have a microphone? I don't want to have an external microphone. That's my thing. I do not want an external microphone. Microphone, built-in, high-quality AGC mic. Bingo. That's the one. Rush Tank Solo. What's the output power on it? Is it only 1 watt? What's the output? Max. It doesn't say. I think it's 1.6 watts. It says 1,000, but I think it'll go above 1,000. So it's not 2.5 watts. Rush Tank 2.5 watt. Is there a 2.5 watt version? Oh yeah. Does it have a microphone? That's the one right there. Doesn't say that it has a microphone. Max Solo 5.8. Mic. Doesn't have a microphone. Damn. Audio in. So you'd have to connect your own microphone module. Well, it's your call. 1.6 watts with a built-in mic or 2.5 watts with an external mic. But that's probably where I would go. Yeah, Blinty.
Some people in chat are asking who are kind of new to this, I guess, why wouldn't it just be wind noise?
Well, yes. You can hear the motors, though. You can hear the motors. Now, you may be thinking, well, I can already hear the motors using my human ears. That is true. However, sometimes you fly far enough away that you can't hear the motors anymore. Now, if you never do that, then this is pointless. But some people like to have an earbud in their ear that lets them hear the motors no matter where the drone is. And you do also hear the wind. Now, people are asking about what if I have digital goggles? Like Nick Hay here says you could have separate audio and HD goggles. Yeah, but there are two things. There isn't a audio transmission system that rivals FPV video system. There are wireless audio systems, but they'll use like Bluetooth and they'll have a range of, you know, a few hundred feet, right? So what if I get an analog VTX, put it on my drone next to my digital VTX, and use the analog VTX just to transmit audio to what? To a standalone receiver that you then wire to an earbud? You could do that, but the problem is having two transmitters on your drone, both of them running in 5.8 gigahertz. It's gonna stomp on your digital video transmitter, and it's gonna be terrible.
They're also going to be 30 milliseconds off of each other.
That's true. There's gonna be a delay.
Something.
Yeah. So I don't like it.
Oh sure.
The audio quality is pretty bad. It's like every time you see video break up in the audio signal, that's crackles and stuff. It's not great. But for people who are used to it, it's like I sleep. Years ago in my 20s, I had a girlfriend who slept with a fan in her bedroom, and I got used to sleeping with a fan on. And now I always sleep with a fan on. When I'm in a hotel and I don't have a fan, it's kind of. I mean, I get by, but it's annoying. And so it's like that. Once you're used to it, you're just used to it. And I think for some people, the audio noise in the earbud is like that. They're just used to it. Okay. Hello, Bino Bravo. Thank you for a $5 super chat. I have a Flylens 85. What walk snail camera and VTX would you recommend I put into it? Probably the 1S Lite, the 1S VTX and camera. Try to save that weight. So probably something like this, the Avatar HD Mini 1S kit. Now, if you wanted to, could go with the Avatar HD Pro kit and get a little more output power. I probably would substitute the camera. So I would buy just this VTX. So not the kit. Products, Caddx, FPV, no, Walk Snail. Product type, Avatar VTX, Mini 1S and Lite, Avatar HD Mini VTX V3. I mean, that sounds like what we want, right? Mini VTX V3, yes. So this is going to be a little bit heavier than the Lite, but charge me $15, no, $5 for USB cable, okay. But it's still going to be, the Flylens 85 will handle it, no problem. And then buy the micro camera, buy the light camera, don't buy the full-size camera. Something like that. Let's see output power on this. 500 milliwatts. That's not that much more than the 1S VTX, but I think it's going to be more stable. The 1S VTX is not very durable. I would probably go with this over the 1S VTX because I think it's going to be more durable in a crash. And then get something like the Nano camera. Okay. Thank you for $10 from Johnny Boy. Do you have a way to do a custom config repo for Betaflight without GitHub? No, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure that you have to have a public GitHub repo to use the presets. I want to back up my drone configs and make it accessible without making a public repo. I have a local GitLab instance. Yeah,
if you're doing local GitLab, maybe you could do something with like the host file where you do a redirect to the address or something.
Yeah.
You know, so you make it think it's going out to GitHub, but it's not. It's going to local. But other than that,
Well,
I don't think there's like a supported way, right?
I mean, it could be. So you're gonna connect presets, preset sources, add new source. You're gonna put a URL here, right?
So maybe
now it
you
has
could
to
do,
be
like, just a local.
It has to be it's looking for a GitHub file that is in the format that's expected. But like theoretically, could you 127.0.0.1 slash, right, my repo slash presets or whatever, right? Could you do that? I don't see why not. But you would have to have GitHub running. You would have to have a fake GitHub website, right?
That's what GitLab is, I think.
Yeah, because it just goes to firmware-presets. It doesn't go to I should zoom in here, hold on. It doesn't go to firmware-presets / index.html or slash presets.json or something, right? So it's downloading this web page. What does this web page look like? So it's going to the whole repo, and then it's going somewhere else to it's going to presets / whatever. It's pulling the whole repo, right? But if you have a local instance of GitHub, like if that's what you're telling me, that's what GitLabs is, Blunty.
Yeah, it's like a local version. I mean, because GitHub isn't a thing. Git is a thing, and GitHub runs Git. So GitLab is another way to run Git locally, from my understanding.
Yes. So but what I don't think you can do is file :/ d / my GitHub / could you? Could you? Hold on. I mean, let's find out.
It's probably looking for the formatting from the page, right?
Yeah, but could you put a file URL? Let me come up with a valid d / OBS stream recordings. File : / d / OBS stream recordings. I need to put this in quotes. I'm not exactly. OBS %20 stream %20 recordings. Make active. I mean, it took it. I don't know if it worked. Right? That's what you could try. If you have a local, like it needs to, but the key is it needs to be this. You can't see it, sorry. It needs to be this. It can't just be presets, or I don't know, maybe it can. But this is what the page is looking for. If you have a local web server where you could go to 127.0.0.1, or you could go to, you know, my local web server or my private web server, if you have a domain that you run, I'm confident it would work if you were running your own instance of GitHub or GitLabs. Anyway, this question will serve exactly 2 people in the whole world, but it's an intriguing question, and I'm glad we spent some time on it. If you get it working, come back and tell us. I'm going to sneeze, hold on. Got to the mute button just in time. Oh, Elliot Bilardo, thank you for $2. Please check my question. JB, I'm desperate. All right, I'll show you my feed. No? What's the question from Elliot Bilardo? Elliot Bilardo says, I have black screen on my analog camera. I tried a different VTX and camera and flight controller, but it still won't work even when the cam is plugged directly to the VTX. All right, so if the camera is plugged directly to the VTX and you have black screen, the first thing I want to check is if you power down the VTX, do the goggles go to static? And what that confirms is that you are on the right channel. So let's say your display is just not working. Your display, your goggles are messed up, and they're just showing black screen. Well, at that point, whether your VTX is on or off, you're just going to see black screen. What we want is to be looking at static, which indicates that the goggles are working, and then we plug in the VTX and it goes to black screen. And that indicates that the goggles are on the right channel and the VTX is sending a signal. That black screen is what the goggles show when there is a VTX transmitting, but it's not transmitting anything. Just blank screen. So the first thing I would do is power down the VTX, the goggles should go to static. If they do not, then the goggles are on the wrong channel. You got to get the goggles, maybe they're in HDMI input and they need to be an analog input or something. Okay. So now we're going to assume that when the VTX is unplugged, you have static. When you plug the VTX in, you get black screen, confirming that the goggles are on the right channel, the same channel as the VTX. Now the problem is that the VTX is not getting signal from the camera. So this is 2 things basically, 3 things maybe. The camera is not getting power. The camera is powered down. You tried a different VTX and camera. Well, if the camera is not getting power, swapping the camera wouldn't make it get power. Get a multimeter out. Probe with a multimeter. Measure voltage. Is the camera getting the voltage that it needs to get? What's the input voltage range of the camera? You're going to need to look that up. If the camera takes 5 to 12 volts and you're giving it 26 volts VBAT, you fried it. That's your problem. Find the voltage input range of the camera. Use a multimeter. Verify that the camera is getting the correct voltage and powering up. You may also feel the camera get warm, although sometimes if the camera is fried, it still gets warm and it's not working. Once you're confident that the camera is getting power, check the video line going from the camera to the VTX. Make sure that you're wiring to the video input on the VTX and not something else. Sometimes the labels on the VTX are misleading. That's the direction I would take the troubleshoot. Swapping VTX and camera and still getting black tells me the camera isn't connected correctly in both cases. I mean, there's definitely a consistent, I think we can probably rule out bad hardware. Although if he's feeding a 5-volt VTX VBAT, then the fact that he swapped the VTX and he fried the second one, it could just be frying things because he's giving them back the wrong voltage. We don't know.
Wait, how do we know the camera's good?
We don't. Like, my guess is that the VTX is fine, and his goggles are receiving black screen because the VTX is powered up, and the camera is not powered up, or the camera is not connected to the VTX correctly. That's my guess.
Real quick, NVRST says if the camera is right, you should at least see OSD if everything else is working. That's not always true.
That's often
the
true,
camera,
but yeah.
Yeah, it's often true, but the camera can give you like bad, like bad frames out of the camera, and then it'll mess up the OSD being able to draw onto those frames. Just so you know, it's not like 100% rule.
Like, if there's no camera at all, and you connect the flight controller to the VTX, you'll see OSD on top of a black screen. But if there's a messed up camera going into the flight controller, going into the VTX, so you know how like the flight controller has to link up with NTSC versus PAL sync pulses? If the camera is sending bad sync pulses, then you could get no OSD. It's true.
Not Jack mentions, you gotta say it, lens cap.
Yeah, good point. Lens cap. Wow. Good. Not Jack with the save. Does the camera have a lens cap on? Wow. Yeah, I would have got there eventually. No, he would still see OSD though. He would see OSD. He's not seeing OSD. Presumably he would have mentioned if he was seeing OSD. Yeah. Anyway. He said Mupshot says if he soldered to the cam pad, he may have misunderstood camera control. That's right, some flight controllers have a cam pad, which is for controlling an analog camera, emulating a joystick. It is not for video. But he also wired direct to the VTX, which would bypass that. All right. Also, the fact that you swapped a camera and VTX, it's easy to overlook this type of failure. And I want to say this as gently as possible. I can't tell you how often I've had someone bring me a problem, and I say, did you check this? And they say, yes, I checked it 3 times. And then I check it, and it's wrong. If you did it wrong the first time, you could have done it wrong the second and third time as well. So when you say I swapped the camera and the VTX, yes, but if you wired them up wrong, you probably wired the second one up wrong too. So the fact that you swapped it doesn't necessarily tell us anything. Wheels to the Sky, thank you for $5. I watched your soldering video. Could you outline some differences when working on a whoop? Tip size, cool little holders. When working on a whoop, I would definitely use a smaller soldering tip for sure. The pads are much smaller. I would also use a lower temperature because, again, the smaller pads heat up faster. RJ9502, thank you for $10. Thoughts on goggle receiver locking to a channel after flash? Ref Discord troubleshooting forum, Sky020 stuck channel. Oof. So look, man, the Sky020 is an old enough goggle. I'm not sure how much help we're going to be able to be. It does have a built-in video receiver, right? Which means you flashed firmware to it, and now, like, who knows what's going on? Like, if possible, can you flash it back? Yeah, he says flashed all legacy firmware options. You have to reach out to SkyZone. Like, I'm gonna guess that you flashed the wrong firmware, but the fact that you flashed back to legacy firmware and it still didn't fix it, that's all I got, man. That's what I was gonna tell you to do, and you did it. At this point, you have to get to SkyZone, and they have to tell you how to fix it.
Yeah, he says in the post they're not helping him, but I mean, that's really the only recourse, you know?
It is. It sucks. It sucks. Like, this is, unfortunately, this is the kind of support we get from Chinese companies sometimes, not always. Sometimes you just, just can't get a response, or they're not as helpful as you'd like them to be. And the fallback then is to ask, like, on a Discord server or on a live stream like mine, but the problem is The Sky 020 is like, I'm not sure I could help you if it was the Sky 04X, but the Sky 020 is like so old. It's not even going to be like that you're going to like randomly find some dude who had the same problem and he's going to tell you the fix. I'm just like, keep emailing them politely, and then also go to their Facebook page and make a post. And again, be polite. If you go scorched earth, probably they're just gonna be like, screw this guy. Okay? So like, that's your call. If you think they deserve scorched earth, then it's not gonna work though. You're not gonna get what you want, and they're not really gonna care, probably. So again, just post on the Facebook page, describe the problem, ask for help, wait a week, do it again. I don't know what to tell you other than that. I wish I had a better answer, but I don't. Any chance soldering a new RX 5808 receiver could help? I don't think so. The RX 5808 is not what's getting flashed. It's their control board. If you could get a spare set of Sky 020s and pull the receiver module out of them and replace it, that might work. The whole module. I mean, that's silly. Why wouldn't you just buy new goggles at that point, right? The Sky 020s, do they have an AV input? I'm sure they do. Could you buy another receiver module and use it through the goggles AV input? Again, that sucks that you have to do that. But like, at least you would be able to keep using your goggles. Yeah, they have an AV input. So like, if you're just desperate to keep using your goggles, get a standalone receiver module, like the SkyZone Sky SteadyView X is just a SteadyView module in a box. Wire it to the AV input, and then just use the AV input and don't use the channel change. I mean, that sucks. But it would let you keep using your goggles. How much are these goggles these days? $289. That's a bummer, man. Never update firmware. Never update, especially on old equipment. On old equipment, just leave it alone. Okay. Thank you for your donation, Michael Alexander. Thank you for a $2 donation. Michael Alexander says, I enjoy my entry to digital with the 04 Lite. Works great for me. I'm in the middle of a few builds and I want to use my 04 Lights, but I can't find a good mounting location on a 5-inch frame. What do you mean? Just double-sided tape, put it behind the camera. Or buy a longer MIPI cable. You can buy a longer MIPI cable, put it in the back. I don't think I would put it on top of the flight control stack. I don't think that's a good idea. Probably a longer MIPI cable is the way to go. 04 Lite. Oh, crap. I just messed up the chat. I'm sorry, Plenty. Come on. There we go. Rotoride.com. Sure. We'll get a good old friend Rotoride. 04 coaxial MIPI cable. You can get a longer MIPI cable for $10. That's what you should buy. Just buy a longer MIPI cable. Put it wherever you want. $10. No brainer. Buy several. Right? Stock up. Banks. Here we are back again with Banks. Thank you for $10. Banks is building an NDAA, a VTOL wing. For those who don't know, NDAA stands for National Defense Authorization Act. It is the bill that that Congress passes every year to make sure that our military can continue to function. It's the one thing that they seem to be able to do without fail. Make sure the military keeps functioning. The National Defense Authorization Act. And at one point, several years ago, they said, "Hey, if you're gonna sell stuff to the military and the federal government, it can't come from China." That's a dramatic oversimplification, but it'll do for the sake of this conversation. So when somebody says they're building an NDAA product. What they mean is they want stuff that's made in friendly countries, not hostile countries. China, Iran, Russia, no. Not sure people are doing a lot of manufacturing in Iran, but not allowed. Thailand, Vietnam, Croatia, USA, whoa, NDA. So when you hear NDAA, it probably means this isn't, like, hobbyists don't give a shit about NDAA. It probably means this is someone trying to sell their product to the government, the military, whatever. Or some federal, probably some federal customer. Trying to build an NDAA wing with ArduPilot, Q ground control using the Tango 2. Can I fly manually with the Tango 2 and the laptop by switching modes? Yes. Yes, you can. Do I have to run Mavlink, or can that be run entirely with Crossfire? So, what I would recommend in your situation is the Tango 2 runs Crossfire. The RC Link is Crossfire. The laptop has a separate radio, like a SICK radio is a common one. 900 megahertz or 400 megahertz SICK radio, or something like that, a separate telemetry radio running Mavlink. And then you can go back and forth between manual control and laptop control. I would not run Mavlink over Crossfire. Crossfire technically does support the ability to do Mavlink over Crossfire, but the packet rate is only 50 hertz, and it's so slow that the performance is terrible. Don't do it.
Yeah, so he needs both then. Okay.
You do not need both. Like, you could just fly it manually with the Tango. Now, most people running ArduPilot don't want to do that. Most people running ArduPilot want Q ground control or mission planner, so they can do all that shit.
So what he's saying is there's no way to do both of those options, the Tango 2 and a laptop, running only Crossfire, right?
There is, yes. You could run Mavlink over Crossfire. So what Crossfire will do is they will carry the Mavlink. Basically, the laptop connects to the Tango 2 via Wi-Fi. Laptop connects to the Tango 2. Tango 2 forwards the Mavlink packets over the Crossfire control link. But again, the performance is awful because the packet rate is only 50 hertz. And I know what you're saying, but Joshua, Crossfire also does 150 hertz. Yes, it does. Out to about 300 or 400 feet. 300 or 400 meters, rather. And then it switches to 50 hertz. And everyone who's doing ArduPilot and Q ground control is going further than 300 or 400 meters. So the problem is that when you're doing ArduPilot Mavlink stuff, you're using Crossfire as your control link, you're going to be at 50 hertz very soon because you're going to be beyond the range that 150 hertz can do. That's just the limitation of Crossfire. So if you're doing Crossfire, Mavlink over Crossfire, I'm going to assume that eventually you'll be on 50 hertz, and at that point the Mavlink performance is just dog shit because it's too slow. ExpressLRS is more optimized than Crossfire because ExpressLRS was made to be lean and efficient, whereas Crossfire, when they first started, they were like, we have all this data, why not use it? 50 hertz is great. That's the 150 hertz low latency. Oh, fantastic. And ExpressLRS had the benefit of hindsight to try to develop a lower latency, leaner controlling. So ExpressLRS can get fantastic range at 100 or 200 hertz. So Mavlink over ExpressLRS actually works okay. 200 hertz is, you can get 10 or 20 kilometers off of ExpressLRS 200 hertz and get okay Mavlink performance. So, what I would suggest though is you either use ExpressLRS radios with Mavlink over ExpressLRS as your control link and your data link, or you use a dedicated telemetry layer radio like those SICK radios that so many people use. I don't know if the SICK radios are Mavlink. Are NDAA. Teo 920, thank you for $5. I replaced an arm on a 7-inch and forgot to tighten the screws and got some smoke. Replace one motor or all? Only replace the smoked motor. Oh, wait. the motor smoked, but it still flies fine? Does it visibly smoked? Oh, he's got pictures. I would probably replace that motor. This one here, even though maybe theoretically the enamel didn't burn all the way through, I don't like it. I would replace that. I've had situations in my life where I saw the tiniest bit of smoke come out of a motor. And when I looked at the motor, I could not see any visible damage. And the motor flew fine, and I kept flying the motor. But if I had a motor that looked like this, I would replace it. But like the other motors, that one's fine. That one's fine. That one's fine. I mean, I see a tiny bit of browning. Maybe it's just the shadow. This is the only one I would for sure replace. Or, you know what? If you like to live on the edge, if it flies fine, just keep flying it. But don't fly it over people, because it could just drop out of the air at any moment. And you'll be like, I didn't know what happened.
Steepness of the 30-year yield, so we're at 355.12, up almost 2 basis points on the 2-year there, more than 2 basis points on the 10-year as the front end comes up. And then let's just take a look at oil, because obviously these Iran secondary sanctions or 25% tariffs on trading partners, it's putting a bid into oil given the discussions around what actually might happen with oil and Iran. And of course, WTI above $60, Brent above $64 today. Gold continues its march higher too. All right, let's get to some individual stocks to watch. Here's Chloe Melly.
Good morning, Bonnie. We are starting with chip makers today, with both AMD and Intel moving higher after being upgraded by KeyBank thanks to really, really strong demand for their tools. And for Intel in particular, analysts have said that this is a company that is making really strong progress because it has technology that no other competitor has. And therefore, we are seeing both of those moving higher today. But in particular, Intel is seeing a really strong share movement this morning, 3.6%. Moving on, but staying within the same sector, and Synopsys is down this morning after being downgraded by Piper Sandler, with analysts saying that this is a company that will face growth headwinds because of a reallocation of capacity to AI chips within that semiconductor industry, and therefore we are a little bit down this morning, about 3%. And finally, Ørsted over in Denmark is moving higher this morning after a US judge ruled that it could resume work on a wind farm off the coast of Rhode Island that the Trump administration had suspended. This is seen as a big win for Ørsted and also really good news for the rest of their renewable energy industry.
Chloe Melly in London, thank you so much. And coming up in this hour, we'll count down to the CPI data with Abigail Watts of UBS. But first, President Trump ramping up the pressure on Iran, posting on Truth Social, quote, effective immediately, any country doing business with Iran will pay a tariff of 25% on any and all business being done with the US. This sparking concerns that it could upend the US-China trade agreement. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Brendan Murray for more. So what are the details, Brendan? Is this in effect or about to go in effect? And, you know, China's reaction hasn't been great, has it?
Yeah, exactly. So President Trump said this latest threat, the broadest tariff threat that we've seen in several months, is effective immediately and is final. We don't have any sort of official paperwork posted on the White House website, some sort of executive order or guidance to the customs agency. But if you take the president at his word, these tariffs are going to go into effect. Now, we've seen this playbook before. He threatens, a big, broad tariff like this to try to guide a geopolitical outcome, and the tariffs don't actually take effect. But he did the same thing with Venezuela, trading partners in Venezuelan oil last year. And of course, India has a 50% tariff on its exports to the U.S. Because of its ties to Russian oil. So a lot to pick through, some questions to ask the White House this morning. But this is definitely the biggest bark from President Trump on tariffs that we've heard in 4 to 5, 6 months.
Yeah, China, as I said, not staying quiet. The embassy in Washington calls it coercion and said Beijing would take all necessary measures to safeguard its legitimate rights. But of course, it's not just China, right? It's India, it's even the EU, it's obviously Turkey.
Yeah, exactly. The UAE, there's a big transshipment hub in the United Arab Emirates where a lot of Western companies assemble products that are, come from Asia through the Middle East there. So there's a lot of confusion about what exactly this threat could do to some of these bigger trading partners. Turkey, their biggest export to the U.S. is petroleum, but not far behind are consumer goods like carpets and textiles. There are some tractor parts and some airplane parts that are among the highest exports from Turkey to the U.S. So there's a lot here to look at beyond the effect on the oil industry, and so we'll have to see how the rest of Washington responds to this latest threat. But at the moment, the biggest risk is that the U.S.-China trade truce that went into effect just a couple months ago kind of disintegrates in the face of this latest 25% tariff threat on China, Iran's biggest trading partner.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we also had the G7 nations coming together to talk about countering China's rare earth dominance, and one of the ideas was that they might form a trading club. And bear in mind, this includes the US, so this is Scott Bessent putting forward this idea or talking about it. I mean, can this happen? Is this legal? How would it happen?
Yeah, exactly. So the U.S. is really trying to get the Europeans, the Australians, the South Koreans to really accelerate this effort to achieve independence from China on rare earths. The U.S. is really pushing this effort, trying to bring along the Europeans who they would view as acting more slowly in this area. But the U.S. is really trying to, with Scott Bessent leading the charge, is trying to say, look, we can't wait any longer to de-risk from our dependency on Chinese rare earths. We have to do that now. And so the goal then would be to set up some sort of trading club, some sort of baseline prices where the countries that are friendly with each other can rely on the supplies of those rare earths rather than go to China every time you need some sort of magnets or other things that are used in autos and other high-end manufacturing.
All right, Brendan, as always, thank you so much. Our trade czar there, Brendan Murray. Backlash mounting after Fed Chair Powell accused the DOJ of launching an investigation on the central bank in a political manner. Senate Majority Leader John Thune joining Senators Tom Tillis and Dave McCormick in opposing the Trump administration's decision, warning that a legal battle with the Fed could make confirming the president's Fed nominees, quote, challenging. For more, Bloomberg's Alistair Bull joins us now. Alistair, what happens next in this farrago?
Well, we don't really know, but the ball is definitely in the Department of Justice's court. You mentioned the Republican senator pushback. Key to that is Tom Tillis, the Senate Republican who sits on the Senate Banking Committee, and he was very quick to come out on Sunday night and say he will block any Trump nomination for the Fed until this matter is cleared up. So they need to clear the matter up. Now, how that looks is going to depend. I mean, the DOJ could say, we're backing off. I mean, it's really not clear, but the ball is in their court. And I think that's kind of the verdict you get from financial markets, because while they have weakened on this, they haven't weakened a lot. And I think there's a sense from investors sort of assessing the support that Trump has got from Republicans, that the administration is going to back away, and they'll be able to sort of move past this.
Is it all in Jeanine Pirro's hands?
Say again, sorry?
Is it all in the hands of Jeanine Pirro to sort this out? Can she back off? Because we have reporting to suggest that she has no plans to.
Yes. In the first case, it is. But she has bosses, and they all work for the president, and it would be, I think one could imagine situations where they would find an off-ramp. I mean, they ask for documents. They could get the documents. They could declare the documents, show that there's nothing to see there. I mean, there's ways to move past this. But the narrative has been framed by Jerome Powell. He's come out and he said that this is an assault on the independence of the central bank. And he's got Republican senators to side with him on that. They've said they too see this as an assault on the independence of the central bank. So when you frame it like that, it raises the stakes very high. and it's going to put the DOJ under an enormous amount of pressure to find a way of de-escalating.
It's not just politicians too, Alistair. Global central banks apparently are working on a joint statement that would be issued under the banner of the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements. Would that hold sway here? I mean, financial markets, central banks elsewhere, do they have an impact on what the president will do?
No, but they do have an impact on how investors view things. And the shoe that hasn't really dropped here is the bond market. We talk about the bond market vigilantes and how they can impose discipline. If the sentiment coming out of respected institutions, thoughtful technocrats who've been doing this for many years, if that has influence on investors and they start to vote with their feet, if that starts to push up bond yields, that really goes to the core of what the Trump administration is trying to achieve here by taking more control of the Fed. They want to lower interest rates to make mortgages more affordable so they can go to voters in November and say, see, we fixed the affordability problem. If mortgage rates go the other way, that's not going to happen. And you've had thoughtful and influential Republican senators like John Kennedy saying this is going to push interest rates up. We need that like a hole in the head.
Alistair, thank you so much. That is Alistair Bull there. Thanks for all the context. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. A bigger bonus for Morgan Stanley bankers in Asia. The bank raised bonuses by about 20% after a record $10 billion in revenue from the region last year. High-performing managing directors across country banking and booming sectors such as tech are expected to receive total compensation, including bonuses, of between $2 and $2.5 million. China is scrutinizing how Jane Street and other foreign firms participate in its $859 billion ETF market. Sources say that Chinese regulators are keen to understand trading patterns in the fast-growing industry, especially after a crackdown on Jane Street in India. And German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said the world is seeing the, quote, final days of Iran's regime, as it can only hold on to power through violence. He is the first G7 leader to predict the downfall of Iran's regime. The remarks come just a day after President Trump said he's imposing a 25% tariff on goods from countries doing business with Iran. Coming up, JP Morgan's set to kick off bank earnings season. More next. This is Bloomberg.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators. Join me for in-depth conversations with the biggest newsmakers on the day's top stories.
The economy has been doing well. That does not tell you what the future is going to be.
We're taking a step-by-step approach, a very systematic approach with India.
This is a time to put a little more defense into your portfolio.
Insight with Haslinda Alam, only on Bloomberg.
Why do the biggest names in business choose Bloomberg Television?
That's a great question.
Very good question.
Interesting question. Good question. Great question. I so appreciate that question. You simply ask interesting questions.
Bloomberg Television. Top experts, great questions. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. ETF IQ, only on Bloomberg.
The trading day is about to start.
And you're already looking for that edge.
The opening trade brings you everything you need to know as markets open across Europe.
Let's talk about the significant risk transfers to find space in their balance sheet.
Hedging some of that risk.
You could look at it the other way. Obviously, this stuff is risk-weighted.
I would much rather be long than be short.
We're in a kind of sweet spot.
Very, very strong alignment.
3 revolutions in one.
I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Anna Edwards.
And I'm Tom McKenzie.
This is your opening trade.
Every trading day, only on Bloomberg.
It's now confirmed 11 central banks have issued a statement in support of Fed Chair Jerome Powell. So those central bankers, which include the ECB, the Riksbank, the Danish Central Bank, the SNB, the RBA, all of the major central banks say they stand in full solidarity with Fed Chair Powell and that he is a respected colleague. They also suggest that independence is, quote, critical. So once again, 11 central banks under the banner of the BIS issuing a statement saying they stand in full solidarity with Fed Chair Jerome Powell and that he is a respected colleague and independence is critical. Powell held in the highest regard. Crucial, perhaps not for the politicians, but definitely for the markets and investors, as we just heard from Alistair Bull. Big bank earnings kicking off today with JP Morgan, with the lender's credit card business under the spotlight after threats from President Trump to force a cap on interest rates. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Charlie Wells. Charlie, before we get to that, just give us a brief rundown of what we should expect today.
Yeah, so look, we're kicking off earnings season with JP Morgan front and center. They are the first to report, and we're seeing some turbulence in the market this week on banking stocks on the back of some of those announcements coming out of the White House. But really the fundamentals here are strong, and they have been for a long time. Bank share prices over the past year have been up, have been outperforming in recent months the broader market. And this has a lot to do with the strong deal pipeline that we've been seeing. Investment bankers for years have been talking about green shoots. We finally saw those come to fruition in that past year. It was the best year in 2025 for deal making since 2021. We've seen strong trading. We're expecting a lot of growth from JP Morgan on that equities trading front, growth of over 31% there. And this environment that banks have found themselves in, at least up to now, that has been more favorable to their business lines.
Should we anticipate any comments around what the president asked for?
Look, Bonnie, that is a very difficult task for these bank executives. Over the past year and a half, really since that November election, they have been riding the more favorable environment for them relatively unscathed and not really having to make a lot of comments, a lot of criticisms of this president. But we have seen the White House get more sensitive on this issue of affordability, really starting to target banks in a way that I think a lot of them didn't expect. And I think it's going to be a very difficult balance today. But it's that commentary that analysts say is so important, not just for what these executives say about Washington, but what they say about the economy more broadly, what they say about that M&A pipeline, and what they say about the AI boom as well, because increasingly we are seeing how important this equities lift that we're getting from this AI boom, how important that is for banks as well.
And I guess we're anticipating chatter around, cost-reducing measures. We saw Citi today set to eliminate 1,000 jobs, BlackRock trimming around 250 positions. For Citi, at least, it's going to be the first of maybe several rounds of cuts this year. Where else should we anticipate hearing about cuts, Charlie?
Well, Bonnie, I think this issue of expenses has been really important in the banking sector over the past few months, particularly last month when we heard JP Morgan talk about how some of their expenses could be bigger than analysts had been expecting, and they were hit in the markets when you look at their share price. So really important for these banks across the board to talk about expenses. There could be trickle-down effects from banks like JP Morgan spending more, and we also know that a lot of this, though, is seasonal, but some of this is structural as well, and you were talking about this years-long effort at Citigroup. This is part of Jane Fraser's plan to make that bank more efficient. This is a part of the plan, say, at BlackRock to spin more into asset management. So we're seeing some of this as seasonal, but also as structural as well.
Charlie Wells, thank you so much. Charlie will be on deck for us for all of the bank earnings season. Coming up, UBS chief Sergio Armati planning to step down in April of 2027. A look at what's making headlines in your front page news next. This is Bloomberg.
issue right now for us in the diamond space is the declared divestment of Anglo from GBS. And as you know, Anglo holds 85% stake in GBS. Botswana, the government of the Republic of Botswana holds 15. We are resolute now, and we've communicated a firm intention to increase our stake in GBS to a controlling stake. We have lined up a number of potential collaborators with us, if I may put it that way. And we have targeted funders, we have parties, we have the Oman Sovereign Wealth Fund, we have others who are willing and ready.
Astonishing day for US technology.
Shaping the region's technology ecosystem.
Asia's biggest tech news and innovation.
Tune in to Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
We gotta talk crypto.
From the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead.
What's the conversation around your company?
Bringing you insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy.
Planning very big things.
A new level of premium.
Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens.
The floodgates of innovation are going to open up.
Can't fake passion. You either are or you aren't.
Bloomberg Business Week Daily, only on Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. Time now for your front page news. First up, the Financial Times is reporting UBS chief executive Sergio Ermotti is planning to step down in April of 2027. Ermotti returned to UBS in 2023 after its state-orchestrated takeover of Credit Suisse and intends to leave after leading that integration. It is a crucial time for UBS as a dispute with the Swiss government is fueling speculation it could move its headquarters abroad. Next up, the Washington Post is leading with reporting that the U.S. plane used in the deadly strike on an alleged drug smuggling boat in September was painted to look like a civilian aircraft. Now, legal experts tell the Post feigning civilian status with explicit intent to kill or wound is known as perfidy under the law of armed conflict and is a war crime. And finally, on the New York Times' front page, California Governor Gavin Newsom vowing to stop the proposed billionaire tax in California. In an interview with The Times, Mr. Newsom said he had been relentlessly working behind the scenes against the proposal and he'll fight the measure if it reaches the November ballot. He says he'll do what he has to protect the state. Now, over in Japan, the Takaichi trade is back on after a report Sanae Takaichi is planning to call a snap election that would provide a mandate for her to continue hawkish diplomacy and pro-stimulus policies. Joining us now with the latest is Bloomberg's chief Asia correspondent, Rosalind Matheson. So, Ros, JGBs are slumping and the yen is very close to 159. What would be the motivation for her to call an election now?
Well, as you were saying, she would be wanting to seek a public mandate. She came to power in October, but not via a general election. So she has an election, she wins well, she can say, here, I've got a public mandate for my policies and my plans, which, as you were saying, hawkish, relatively hawkish foreign policy. So we've seen those tensions increase already with China and juicing the economy at home with the stimulus. So the reports in the Japanese media are that she will call to dissolve the parliament in the coming weeks and move quickly to an election in early February. Of course, she's got quite high approval ratings, 70%, whereas the ruling party, the LDP, only has a very small majority in the lower house of parliament. So her bet here would be that she can riff off her high approval ratings to improve the party's majority in parliament and therefore her ability to enact her policies, especially around the economy.
Markets are not loving this at all, Roz. I mean, the yen at 159 has to be concerning to policymakers. What kind of more fiscal expansion would she engage in that would have markets this jittery about, the prospect of a clearer mandate?
Well, she's made very clear that that's where she's leaning, and so the markets are concerned, as you call it, the classic Takeichi trade, where you see yen, stocks, and bonds all responding, and we've seen a continuation of that trade in Asia and through the world today on those reports that she's going to call a snap election, because of course with that bigger mandate and that popular election, she'd be able to say, well, I've got endorsement and I'm able to push on. And of course, there's a budget coming for the new fiscal year starting in April. And the question is, what would be in that, therefore, if she does manage to sneak in with an election beforehand? I mean, the yen has been around those levels again that we saw previously with finance ministry intervention. We saw a bit of jawboning from the finance minister. She said she's spoken with Scott Bessent about one.
他不是疯子，他也不是笨蛋。
你们没有在那座丛林里面，他妈不知道敌人在哪里，子弹怎么来，你们没有在现场，你不要跟我讲，你上过战场。
这椅子要垮了是不是？
哎，这椅子也用很久了。
对，从改版之后就一直用这种椅子。
新世界之后吗？
新世界吧。
新世界之后是什么？
就是这个椅子。
我是说新世界之后要叫什么名字？
哎，为什么我们要想新？
我们
这个系列不
我觉得我们可能
叫新世界？
要先想一下椅子的部分比较好，就是椅子已经
奇奇怪怪了。
开始有点这木头的啦。
我说我们换塑胶的就比较容易坏。
板凳吗？
塑胶更容易坏吧？它不是会裂化吗？
对啊。
我说 IKEA 的那种做的不错吧，折叠的，好用，黑色的。
哎，知道那个。
我也不知道，高脚椅。
没有这个可以放。
啊，可是我觉得这个
很
不错
爽
对啊。
是哦。
对，我们那时候故意找就是餐椅类型的折叠餐椅，其实意外的蛮少的，但有的其实很贵，就是一张
7、8千。对，
那个
因为它就是原木的那种打造，
就是不能折叠的有很多，然后也没有到很贵，但是不能折叠，在这空间真的会死。
对，因为这空间收纳上有一点难度啊。
所以就是我再多个4张这种不能折叠的餐椅后，我真的不知道放哪，因为这种通常不能叠，有扶手不能叠。
你们的现在也会晃，对不对？
晃爆
！Oh my god！
不要再晃它。
我觉得是不是都是因为被你做过的关系啊？
不是啊。
而且我记得我们有一次有锁它，有重新锁过，但现在又开始。
但这个餐椅有点难锁，
这时候就要推荐大家IKEA，
没有，目前没有，
还没有。那有没有那个折叠餐椅的家具厂商想要
推荐我们，
跟我们合作的？
一下。
对，
说不定我们可以那个做那种 baby 的椅。
比如前面有个那个板子那个，那这个是要干嘛？我们还要带那个橡胶的围兜兜。
好可爱哟！
哎，我小时候从来没有带过那种橡胶的围兜兜。
长大之后才有出那一款吧？
那你瞧不起吧？
好用的感觉啊！
我就瞧不起啊，小时候的你。
瞧不起这个吗？
对啊，
我有超容易流口水。小时候
很容易流口水。
你怎么会？
其实大家小时候都容易流口水啊。
但我听我妈说，我是流的很夸张，
特别流，就像狗看到食物就开始那个
然后我吃东西很容易掉，我妈叫 key 嘴，台语有个词叫 key 嘴，就是你那个嘴巴容易吃东西掉出来叫 key 嘴。
那你现在还留胡子？
我现在没有了，好不好？
胡子是为了接住。
接住它们。
而且我不知道为什么我有种病就是我吃涮涮锅的时候不都有一张纸吗？我吃完特别脏。
没有，那不是病，就是不经脑，懂我意思吗？吃东西，我们小时候被讲就你这做事情怎么不经脑，这样不长脑。
我没有骂到这么难听，
不是难听，不是难听。
我们好像没有骂到这么，就是没有羞辱到，就是这人脑有问题这样。
不是，
就是嘴巴有问题，但是羞辱到脑。
不经脑是指说，就是你怎么没有想一想啊？不是说你脑有问题，病才是有问题。
哦，
一样在羞辱吧？
是你自己造成的，而不是你有问题。
是啊，所以你吃东西都不会掉。
我吃东西吗？不太会耶，我好讨厌掉东西。我掉东西我就想把它插起来，然后
那就是会掉，所以才会有插起来的动作。
但是我不会都很脏啊。对啊，就是我不喜欢桌面上太夸张。
意思就是说，其实吃东西很脏的人，是不是你的脑你没有病，就是你自己有问题，
就没有注意而已嘛。
哦，没有，但我必须说，他吃东西就会乖乖的站在桌子前面，比如说我们那边外面空间，但他就是会拿灯，然后走来走去，然后就哎呀，然后去拿卫生纸。
我吃预饭团，我承认我也有掉过，但是我一定马上捡起来。因为太可惜了吧？对啊，
我听不懂，没关系，
就掉一口，哇
！3秒定律，3秒定律。
所以会把它吃掉吗？
我们这里吗？不会。
哎，那
哪里可哪里会？
心里还是觉得可惜啊，就觉得少了一口这样子，对吧？就一咬下去的时候，只有海苔整颗这样下去了。
太大块了吧？
哦，这就是吃芝麻然后不掉饼。
啊，对，掉了最大的
这样子。
但我就会拿起来吃，说实话。
但我是说，吃东西掉东西，每一个人呐，看，除非你一个人吃有什么关系嘞？又不会有店员过来收拾你的东西，说哇，吃也太脏了，什么客人啊？
而且他现在不是都增量吗？所以他增量就是预防大家掉到地上，不用难过，我们的量还是够的。
增量，但是变贵了。增量的是贵的吧？
增量要变贵吧，不然增量
那就不叫增量了啊，那就是变。
但是那个鲔鱼沙拉，它是鲔鱼的部分有增量，它没有变贵。但是统一调价，它没有单个变贵。
它要出一个就是长条形，就像那种蛋糕卷一样，那你预饭团就整个这样一条。
汇方卷。
三角形预饭团，一次10个，但它没有切。
还是三角形？
对，
三角柱。
对，三角柱的预饭团，啊，这样可以慢慢看。
但我小时候很喜欢吃那个长形。
雅尼克会出吗？
长形的
啊，
汇方卷。
你不用按指法，你吃汇方卷会按哪个音吗？要不然吃汇方卷，这什么习惯啊？
你喜欢吃那种？
我很喜欢吃那个，然后一定要肉松口味。
哦，我不喜欢肉松口味。
肉松超好吃，我超讨厌有时候然后一吃鱼松饭。
哦，松类我都不会吃。
为什么？
我没有很喜欢，我饭团我不是不吃肉松的东西，我只是饭团不喜欢吃肉松口味的。我都吃就是比如说什么。什么鲔鱼沙拉，然后什么龙虾小沙拉，这种
沙拉类的，
这种沙拉类的我比较喜欢。
你喜欢冰的，就是没有热的东西的时候配那个。
没有热的东西的时候配。
肉松就要配稀饭
啊，对，我是。
你看。
我是肉松配稀饭派的，单吃肉松对我来说不太可行。
天哪，我小时候超喜欢单吃肉松，在半夜的时候。
肉松，
我小时候也是，因为小时候口水比较多。
要塞住吗？要止水。
止水会吸。
它就是一个那个干式马桶的概念，可以把那水全部吸掉，对，就不会流下来。但长大之后口水比较没那么多的时候，就是
不吃了，
对，就觉得喉咙很干，就没有那么喜欢。就是稀饭的话，这样 OK，
因为小时候以前在家里晚上都吃完饭，大家里不会有什么零食，你就会偷东西吃啊。
家里不会有零食哦，你们家这么严格哦？
我记得你家应该比我严格吧？我记得你以前是偷吃盐巴。
啊，我偷吃盐巴？谁知道这个消息？我不知道哎。
那个时候在打仗吗？
偷吃盐巴。
打仗，台湾蛮少缺盐的，你知道这个沿海的地方。
我小时候
我记错了吗？不是你偷吃盐巴？
没有啊，
我偷吃胡椒盐。
哦。
对，我把胡椒
打仗吗？
对，你在打仗。
你家打仗吗？
那时候还在内乱，不好意思。
几岁？
我跟我姐真的会这样子，然后。不是偷吃的原因，不是因为没得吃，是因为我妈觉得不健康。
是我认识的那位姐姐吗？
对啊，
偷吃盐巴。
陈会计师，对啊，陈会计师跟我以前都会把胡椒盐弄在手上啊，这样子。
你妹嘞？
还没出生。
多小啊？
就小学吧，就很小，小时候，很小的时候，对啊，然后
他怂恿你吗？然后说
应该是我怂恿他吧。
弟弟过来，手伸出来，换手背。我一起。
下一个绝子。
超像。
应该是这样才对吧？谁胡椒也吸进去会呜的。
哇，这个键盘的触键好舒服啊！773。
给你那个打计算机的时候 boost 可以上去。
不然你小时候没有偷吃哦？
我小时候没有偷，
他长大才偷吃啊。
我小时候偷吃的东西哦，我们家小时候是有零食的吗？有吧，糖果吧。
哦，好好哦。
糖果吧，就是我们小时候。
萤火虫字母。
不是啊，不是。
加点水。
是比较一颗糖，就是它会有一个糖果嘛，然后它
这么大。Like a ball。
糖果罐吧，这个是。
没有，就一个糖 糖果，
一个，
对，然后它就是
哦，这可以填很久。
candy 吗？吗？
对，那你饿的时候就去舔，它放在那边。
那东西叫元气玉或什么之类的。
没有，它放在那边。
可是谁的灵魂哦？
然后它会有一些龙的雕像在旁边，然后有水，然后流过这样子。
那个不可以吃吗？
风生水起。哎，那个不甜吧？但是其实我长大之后
加一糖。
哦。
调味。
像那个甜甜圈一样，把它丢进那个糖粉那个上，滚，然后。
所以我小时候。
跟我长大，其实我很想要去舔看看个东西。像我没有实际上做，
好好说，
真的。盐灯。
你会好奇它是不是盐的？
你们不会吗？你知道每次去有一些真的很正宗的咖喱店，就是印度咖喱店，里面都有卖盐灯，你知道吗？
我知道。我跟你讲，
我好想舔舔看，真的。
但说真的，你真的可以问有卖盐灯的观众，其实你买一颗来舔也没问题啊，不舔你就把它丢掉了，不咸吧？
很贵哎，盐灯超贵。
只是想要吃它。
买小颗的啊。
我现在想舔它摆在那边的那个。
所以你舔到不咸的，也说老板是假的。
哎，是吧？
对啊，
它或是它在上面然后撒盐这样。
你下次去，他有专卖盐灯的店呢。
有啊，
就是说老板我要试货。我说哦，这个随便你看，你要看这一尊吗？然后就
我要舔。哎，但你知道台湾之前有一阵子是很流行那个盐盘烧烤，
为什么？
就是它是用类似像盐灯那种东西，就是硬的那种盐，然后把它变成一个类似像烤盘的东西，然后直接在火上面烤那个肉，
所以肉直接就有咸味。
对，肉直接就有咸味了。
好咸，
很咸哦。
哦，
我有吃过，很咸。但是那个我确定就盐，但盐灯的那个我就不知道到底多咸，就会很想要整块买。
你其实很重咸，对不对？
他都可以把拉面的汤喝完了。
都是。拉面也是嘛？啊，烧肉也是。
烧肉还好，我烧肉其实有时候会完全不沾酱，直接吃。
身为一个得过肾结石的人，我真的不相信。
没有，我汤是啊，我汤是咸的，没错。因为拉面汤的确是咸的，可是烧肉的话不一定。意外的我还像火锅现在我其实不沾酱是完全可以吃。
但我问你，你们有试过就是铁汤匙吃起来甜甜的？
啊？
你那时候在打仗对不对？
不是，铁汤匙吃起来甜甜的。有感觉？你想象一下，一个铁汤匙干净的，含它，越舔越甜的。
没有吧？铁其实有一种味道哎，
有血味哎，如果铁锈味，其实这种血味啊，
是吗？
然后你觉得那是甜味？
你
要不要做一下检查？
拙劣的吸血鬼表演。
咔。不好意思，你刚刚那是龅牙哈，我要吸血鬼，不是龅牙。
这也太强人所难了吧？
你那有点好笑哦。不要再搞笑了啊！我们再一个 take。
奇怪，吸血鬼一定要长这两边嘛？也有长正边的啊。他伸出来
那叫做还没冷屁。
土拨鼠哎，这样。
他的吸血的地方是他门牙不行哦，吸血鬼一定要两边哦。一定有这种吸血鬼吧？吸血鬼牙齿都长那样吗？
你知道吸血鬼长这样，它这样
啊
含入之后，血比较容易从这3个孔进去。如果你长在这边，你戳破之后，你就要这样吸。
对啊，
而且谁门牙是尖的呢？
吸血鬼啊，
啮齿类的。
我说吸血鬼就会是有这种吸血鬼。
那如果害羞咬嘴唇的时候，不就流血了吗？
都会流血啊，不管哪里都会流血啊。
犬齿不会啊，
有些人他尖的是智齿哎，他还咬不到。
后面。
但是吸血鬼嘴巴还要张很大哎，
好像啃大骨一样那样。
它只能咬的范围大概就是手腕这一区，
是不是？所以我们不能这样笑。
那吸血鬼会被淘汰掉？
对啊，
它可能就会直接就被淘汰掉了，适者生存了嘛。
他们就是慢慢往前长，长到这里发现这里就可以，这里可以。
吸血鬼的达尔文。
对，吸血鬼的达尔文。
达尔文的进化论。
好，我们今天的主题就是吸血鬼了，来大家聊一下。
吸血鬼的没有
哪一种呢？
我们吸血鬼可以聊一集吗？这样不行。对，好。
没有开场乐。
今天不是这个啊，还没有啊，还没开始啊。
还在聊是不是？好来，我们现在的开场聊天越聊越长，
对，太长了。
对啊，大家好，我是阿达，
很康，
我是阿丽，
欢迎大家收看。
哒啦康，哒啦
哒啦哒啦康，哒啦
哒啦哒啦康，哒啦
爱在家。
哎，是龅牙，还是
德古拉不是吗？德古拉不是这样拼的
Dracula
哦，是啊，我真的不知道哎。
Dracula 啊，是啊 Dracula
Vampire
也是 Vampire
啊
Dracula 是那个最有名的吸血鬼的名字。
不要拍了，
不是不用拍了，
不用拍了，
别怕，你等一下会怕吧？别怕，无钱要怕啥？
好，来，这一集来到了，
他现在不想聊了。
没有，我觉得是不是因为你们跟漫才少爷待久了？
漫才少爷，
所以现在你们就是一种，也是一个可以很发散式的。
没有哎，
没有，我们看他那个不叫发散，
那叫做没有要跟你连接，他没有从你这边出去，
他那个就是量
一
子
直在外面，
量子没有要纠缠，量子独立。对，其中一位。
好，我们这一集就是来抱怨我们的漫才少爷。
抱怨吗？
我说他看起来啊，
我没有，我觉得这样没有不好啊。
因为哈利在我们的第3集去年的第3集的时候，其实他
第9季第3集
其实没有来演出嘛，因为他告假去演了其他剧团的演出。然后那时候我们就找了我们的好朋友以及我们的算是日本来的前辈的漫才少爷来跟我们合作。
对，
然后做了我们好的搭档，跟我们跑巡演这个样子。然后我只记得一句话，就是说，秘书长说，希望可以一直跟搭档跑巡演就好了。
你对此的感想是？
不要。
奴家受不了啊！
对啊，那现在因为有一些
只有太监受得了，
也已经释出了嘛。那我记得哈利有来看高雄场，对吧？
对，我看到好像是最后一场，
然后还冲出来疯这个样子。
对啊，他好上台变鬼王哎，鬼王哈利哎。
对啊，当然在哈利的角度，我们蛮想要听听看说，哎，这么长久以来，然后跟达康合作下来，其实我们达康一直都不是一个会去容易 fit 别人的团体。
尤其好莱达康其实从来没有过。
对，然后那一直以来合作对象也都是哈利，从玩游戏然后到后面演段子。对啊，那突然拉开来距离，然后看到漫才少爷跟我们合作，然后在好莱达康里面，你的感觉是什么？
我觉得很棒啊！你们真的不考虑以后跟他们合作？
你很棒的部分是哪个部分？我跟你讲，是看笑话的部分吗？还是你觉得这成果很棒？哪一个部分？
出其不意，很棒。因为我那时候就是在演出的时候，我就一直关注你们已经开始巡演了嘛，然后就看大家都说很棒，很好笑天哪！然后我想说哇，好羡慕啊，不好意思就是没有办法，但是他们做的超好的感觉。然后到我现场看的时候就我懂大家的心情但我必须说真的很棒。
就是还是棒。
从你们那个4人段子开始，我就已经知道有趣了。
这一切已经不在控制内了。
对，哇！
司令官，
而且每一场都不一样有趣了。
这的确是一个很妙的事情。
真的就是一个
妙吗？
我如果可以每场都去看，我真的会想要每场都去看。
因为说真的，我们3个比较是因为认识。
Ground reporting from across the continent. Tune in to Daybreak Europe, only on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. Mounting pressure on Iran and its trade partners. This after President Trump said he is imposing a 25% tariff on goods from countries, quote, doing business with Iran effective immediately, without providing details about the scope or implementation of any charges. Mika Zollner of Bloomberg Government joins us now from Washington. So how could the president start imposing this? Should we expect that he will actually do it, Mika? What are some concerns around the announcement?
Yeah, I think that anything is possible when it comes to what President Trump actually puts out on Truth Social, which is often and at all hours of the night. But obviously, tensions with Iran are really escalating. The president put out the tariff threat yesterday, but this also comes after he announced on Friday that the U.S. is, quote, locked and loaded against Iran if they take action against peaceful protesters in the country.
Yeah, and I mean, it's going to have an implication certainly on U.S. relations with China as well. China's embassy in Washington already coming out all guns blazing really on this, saying that this is coercion.
Certainly, I think that's going to have a big impact on U.S. adversaries and allies of Iran, and I think that the president's team is aware of that. But it seems that Trump is really flexing his foreign policy chops right now, and he's trying to send a message right now that the U.S. is not going to stand for the Iranian government going after and killing innocent protesters on the ground, which has been escalating in numbers.
Now to move to the Fed, because we have more senators really suggesting that this probe of Fed Chair Jerome Powell, has to stop, and that they won't be very amenable to any kind of new Fed chair nominee if it doesn't. Tell us more about this, Mika. Who's joining voices with Tom Tillis now?
Yeah, there's a lot of GOP senators and House members that have yet to comment on this. I mean, one notable person is Senator Tim Scott, who's the top Republican when it comes to banking issues and the one that oversees the Fed. And he's been very quiet on this issue. A lot of other lawmakers, even hardliners on the House side, Andy Harris, chairman of the Conservative Freedom Caucus, he said that, this really isn't his jurisdiction. But this is really astounding to see the DC Attorney Jeanine Pirro kind of go at this independently, and her claims are because of the Fed's renovations, but obviously there's a lot of talks and accusations that this is really just about interest rates. So it's really interesting to see the administration distance itself in a way from what she wants to do.
Yeah, exactly. Now, we also are seeing Scott Bessent with other G7 nations talk about paths to countering China's rare earths dominance. In fact, for once using a sort of a multilateral body to actually create some kind of a club, apparently, Mika. Tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, this has been discussed with the G7, and I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation that we're going to see when it comes to Chinese dominance. I mean, this is something that's been really prominent on Capitol Hill, too, and the White House. They're, really trying to counter that. But I think this is also a step to show that the U.S. is really trying to focus in on China as it also focuses on other areas of the world right now.
All right, Mika, thank you so much. Mika Sollner there of Bloomberg Government in Washington. Turning to banks, JP Morgan kicking off earnings before the bell. Back with us now is Bloomberg's Charlie Wells. Charlie, what numbers in particular should we be looking out for today?
Vonnie, Fortress Diamond really is going to be kind of front and center and really setting the tone for the other Wall Street banks as it starts to report. And there are a number of factors that we're likely to hear about that really show how strong the banking sector has been over the past 12 months. We are in a world where JP Morgan could report the highest annual profit in the history of American banking. And what is underpinning a lot of this is strength in a lot of different units. For instance, equities trading. We're likely to see, at least according to estimates, growth of over 31% on that front. We're likely to see fees coming from a lot of these deals in the M&A world that we've been seeing. Investment bankers able to clip those fees to the tune of billions of dollars. But also thinking about JP Morgan in particular, the expansion of its loan book, the fact that it has been opening up its checkbook to finance a number of these debt deals and out-competing a lot of these private credit shops that we've been hearing about for so long as potential threats to the major banks. We are seeing JP Morgan come and counter those threats. So for all of these reasons, bank stocks have been on a tear, and this is why we're expecting to see a very healthy report coming out from JP Morgan in just a few hours.
Yeah, in fact, I believe that less than 1 hour at this point, Charlie, and then of course we have to wait for the call. Now, we're also seeing job cuts though in the city and cities obviously worldwide. So Citi cutting 1,000, BlackRock 250, and there might be more to come.
Right, so it's one thing for me to talk about these solid numbers coming out of JP Morgan, but we also saw last month when they talked about expenses to grow, to increase volume, expenses that were in excess of what analysts had thought. That really pummeled their share price. And that hits to the point that even though a lot of these banks do have significant profits, they've got to keep expenses under check. They have investors watching them with razor focus. So we're seeing that spill out into a number of these layoffs at Citi, even outside the banking sector into broader finance with BlackRock, about 1% of their global workforce coming to be laid off as that asset manager looks to alternatives. So a lot of change here. Some of this is seasonal, but some of this, of course, is structural as a number of these financial firms try to rejigger themselves for the years ahead.
Charlie, thank you so much. Looking forward to your great coverage today, tomorrow, and Thursday. That's Bloomberg's Charlie Wells. Delta Airlines also set to report earnings today. The first major carrier to report this quarter is expected to deliver an upbeat forecast. Bloomberg's managing editor for space and aviation, Benedict Kamel, joins us now with the latest. So what should we expect out of Delta? What kind of tone will Delta set for the industry, Benny?
So similar to what Charlie just said on JP Morgan, this is the first airline to report for the industry. So again, they are a bit of sort of pace setter. It'll be interesting to see what sort of outlook they provide. If you think back at 2025, that was a very roller coaster sort of year for the industry. They came into 25 feeling very good about their prospects. People were traveling. The pandemic was well in the rearview mirror, and then the tariffs hit and things really fell apart. The industry did manage to recover over the course of the year, but obviously this is something that the industry will hope to avoid this year, another sort of peak and trough sort of scenario. The airline has done very well, as the industry broadly, particularly in the sort of premium segment, so people who upgrade to premium economy or to business. That's an area that's been very strong, and Delta has been a net beneficiary of that. United, for instance, has also been very strong in that. But it's a question of, will we see a sort of bifurcation of the industry between the haves and the haves not? People at the back of the plane will there's less money to be made off those people, and you're seeing it in the budget part of the industry. So sort of how that industry will split up between the premium segment and the main cabin, that's another thing that we'll be looking out for.
And what about aircraft upgrades? So Delta is one of those that has a lot of old planes in its inventory?
Yeah, so Delta does have a very diversified fleet. They also have a very large fleet. They have almost 1,000 aircraft in active service. And you're right, they do still have a fair number of older aircraft like the Boeing 767 or the 757. Those are two planes that are out of production effectively. So there might be some comments on, where does the fleet progression go? Might there be orders? We have seen Boeing pulling some really strong orders over the last couple of months, not least because President Trump has been very supportive of Boeing, and he's really used that company as a sort of tool of statecraft, particularly abroad. So we had Alaska Airlines order some aircraft just last week. So there might be some comments on that going forward. So those are that's another point to look out for.
All right, Benny, a lot to watch today. Thank you so much, Benedict Kamel there. Coming up, we're going to get you set up for your trading day, CPI, and obviously earnings on deck. This is Bloomberg.
It's the world's second largest economy, with a growing influence in global affairs. Bloomberg The China Show brings you the unmatched expertise you need to keep track of breaking news, in-depth market analysis, and the most influential newsmakers in and around China.
We need to do more to engage the market more. We're risk on. I think we caught a little sweet spot.
Massive savings right now.
It's already a different game.
Bloomberg The China Show. Weekdays around the world, right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Bringing you up-to-the-minute geopolitical news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Stephen Engel at Japan's Akasaka Palace in Tokyo, and this is Bloomberg.
Making money isn't about drowning in emotions. It's about understanding what's actually happening. Markets are the best way to glean signal from noise, and that is what we try to do every morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
technology is embedded in every aspect of our lives.
And laying the foundation for the future.
From finance to defense, AI to entertainment.
And from the road to the stars. Bloomberg brings you the latest stories of the people and companies pushing the tech sector to new frontiers.
And the politics that shape global tech markets.
I'm Caroline Hyde in New York.
And I'm Ed Ludlow in San Francisco.
Watch Bloomberg Tech every weekday.
Only on Bloomberg Television.
Join me each week on Wall Street Week for stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. More than what you need to know, it's what you need to think about.
This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. Now a look at what's ahead today. Bank earnings kicking off already with JP Morgan reporting before the bell. Plus we also get Delta earnings. And then a raft of data, including US CPI numbers. They're out at 8:30 Eastern. Plus, President Trump delivering remarks at the Detroit Economic Club. That's at 2 p.m. Eastern. Let's take a look at some pre-market movers now. So we have Intel up more than 3%. Some analyst calls this morning, Intel and AMD getting upgrades to overweight at KeyBank, which notes that the chip makers have largely sold out their server CPU in 2026. And Synopsys down almost 3% as Piper Sandler downgraded Synopsys to neutral on growth headwinds. Let's take a look at the macro picture. So futures are pointed lower, but we've had 3 records for the S&P already this year consecutively. One was yesterday. The dollar index is climbing back up just a little bit. The 10-year yield up almost 2 basis points there to nearly 4.20. And oil, WTI above $60, Brent above 64 on geopolitical risks concerning Iran. That's it for Bloomberg Brief. Surveillance continues the conversation. Do stay with us. This is Bloomberg.
We are in such an incredibly exciting moment with AI. It is really the most profound technology of our lifetimes, and I think it has the potential to help us rethink literally everything. The potential for economic impact, societal benefit is honestly boundless. When we think about the economic impact for Europe in particular, it's around a 1.2 trillion euro estimate of the productivity growth that can be unlocked. This platform shift that we are living through, I think, is going to create untold amounts of value for the world, but also for the businesses and for economies, which is why I'm incredibly optimistic in this moment for Europe, but also for the whole world.
How do you think about job losses or safety for some of the AI tools?
You know, I hear the anxiety and I understand the anxiety about jobs. I think that we are certainly going to live through a massive transition about how people learn to work alongside these tools. I mean, the reality is I do think there'll be some number of jobs that are displaced. I think it is a smaller number maybe than some anticipate. We estimate it's around 7%. And I think what's important is that we have programs that help those 7% transition into new fields of work. I think what is more likely is that most of us are going to learn to work alongside these tools. So we estimate about 2/3 of us. When you think about the tasks you do in your daily life, when you look at every industry, there are administrative tasks happening everywhere, and that's what AI is most helpful in improving.
Asia is at the forefront of some of the world's biggest stories. And we're here, where the action starts in Sydney and in Tokyo, yet ahead as the Global Trading Day begins. The Asia Trade, weekdays only on Bloomberg.
Get your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield around the world right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Equity investors care about corporate earnings. The stocks are a little overheated here going into earnings season.
We're risk on right now as we start 2026.
The markets, I think, have correctly gravitated to the positive fundamentals.
You're just going to have a more sensitive market.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, and Anne-Marie Hordern.
Live from New York City this morning. Good morning, good morning. For our audience worldwide, Bloomberg Surveillance starts right now. Coming into Tuesday, coming off all-time highs. Equity markets shaking off the politics, putting together back-to-back records. As JP Morgan is kicking off earnings season for the big banks on Wall Street, economists are waiting for the latest read on inflation while the door is closing on another rate cut.
We get the December CPI coming out at 8:30 a.m. Eastern, and to me, this is going to be the key moment of the morning, in part because what we have gotten over the previous two readings was so messy. And people are wondering whether you get sort of a rebound effect here. If you do get a more robust inflation rate, does that put the kibosh on some of the complacency that we're seeing in the markets, because it really reintroduces Fed rate risk at a time when the Fed is very much in the hot seat?
JP Morgan is saying no more rate cuts for the rest of this year. You were in the room with the New York Fed President John Williams just yesterday. He's not signaling anything anytime soon.